Do you know what a coolant leak looks like on a vehicle? Whether you own a vehicle or whether you're buying a vehicle, do you know what you're looking for? Now, the very easy bit is this. Now, this is my car and it's broken. 2 days previously, this water pump wasn't leaking. But then 2 days later, it was. Now, it isn't unusual for components to break, sometimes without any sign. And this was really obvious because there was lots of coolant dripping down. It was actually, it wasn't just a drip, it was pouring down. So it was a catastrophic failure. But what does it look like when it's a very, very small leak? Let me show you on another vehicle. So there are 2 types of systems. This is one of them, and this is the system that's got a header tank. Now, this one is probably the most easiest one to start with. So this one, all the coolant goes into here. Now, as the coolant gets hot, it expands. And what happens is the coolant, I would say the coolant should be on the maximum. And as the coolant expands, you don't want it to stay in the block. It could crack the block or, break other components. So you want it to be able to expand. And what happens is this header tank allows the coolant to expand. So you want somewhere there should be a minimum line and a maximum line. Sometimes it's actually in the plastic and you've got to find where it is. Sometimes you'll often find that is the maximum line there. So this is quite obvious. You can see that there's no coolant in this. So the coolant's got to go somewhere. So either it's leaking external, i.e. it could be in some of these pipes here, or it could be internal and going either in the oil of the engine or could go into the cylinder bores where it's burnt off. So that's number one, but let me show you the other one. The other one's a bit more complicated. Now, you have to remember, in the good old days, we never had an idea about how bad some of these liquids were for the environment. And often what we'd allow it to do, and particularly in the case of coolant, is if it leaked or if there was too much in the system, we'd just allow it to drop to the ground, go onto the floor, which would then obviously go into the natural environment and then cause damage. So we needed to stop that, and that's where this second system comes into play. So in the radiator here, the coolant used to have a little gap at the top and allow for expansion, and anything that didn't fit would just come straight out and go out into the atmosphere straight down there. Now, what we've got is a recovery cap now that goes to a recovery reservoir, and you can see here that this coolant is about here. Now, we've got to find that maximum minimum mark, and we can see that the coolant is between the full and the cold, and it's about there. Now, that might be okay, but it could also indicate a leak, because I prefer to have them here. So let's have a look to see what the obvious signs are. But before we do, we don't want to trust just this. Let me show you something. So the radiator cap allows coolant to come out when it expands, and then when it shrinks, it draws the coolant that's in the reservoir back into the radiator. So it should stay full all the time. So if we take this cap off, let's just twist it off there. Now, mind the sign. This is cold, by the way. When a vehicle is hot, it's very possible that this coolant could just suddenly boil up and spray all over you. And if you want to know what that looks like, there's a video on the internet. You go and find it. But let's just take this off, and you'll see that there's 2 parts to this cap. There is a seal down here and a seal here. And this seal is for the vacuum. This is the vacuum valve. See, that lifts up and down. Sorry, put it in the middle. See, that lifts up and down. And that allows the coolant to go out of a tiny hole here, through this line and into the recovery tank. And then when it cools down, that valve allows it to come back. This also keeps pressure in the system too. Usually about anywhere from 7 to 15 psi. Some of them are a lot higher than that now. But this coolant here, you can see, is actually in the top here. So we do have coolant in the system, but I have seen them before where there's a full reservoir but no coolant in the engine itself. So just watch out for that and check that. And again, make sure it's cold when you do so. Now, let me show you this leak. So inside the coolant, you probably already know that there is a colorant. So there's different colours of coolants. There's reds and greens and blues and yellows. And to be honest, I don't like the yellows. They're often quite hard to see, but that's just personal opinion. But when coolant gets old, it is really hard to see. It almost goes like water, and it loses a lot of its additives that's in there. Now, the issue with that is that it's very hard to see any coolant leaks. That means when you put brand new coolant in, and we all say in the trade that coolant is really good for finding leaks. If you want to find a leak, put in new coolant and it will find it. But that additive that's in there, when it comes out and when it stays on the engine, it turns into a crystal. And often you can see those crystals, and they are the first sign that you have a leak in the system. And let me show you what those crystals look like. So this is the top hose of the radiator, and you can see down here there's just a very slight discolouring just here. Now, in and of itself, yeah, maybe not, but just look underneath it here. Can you see? Let's see if I can get it so it doesn't cut. Can you see those crystals shapes that are there? It is actually slightly wet as well. See that there? That is the coolant that's come out. It's dried up and it's left a crystal behind, and that's the additive that's in the coolant. That tells me that something probably directly above it is leaking, which it's very common for aluminium to actually corrode and not keep a good seal between the hose and the aluminium, which means you may be up for having to change this component here and this component here. That's if you're lucky. Now that's probably going to go to a thermostat, so you're probably going to change the thermostat as well. Let me see if I can just zoom into that for you so that you can see that discoloration happening in the background. See that? That's what you're looking for a coolant leak. And if you see that on a vehicle, that's probably going to tell you that the vehicle is losing coolant. Now you might think that that's all over Red Rover. We found the leak, and so there you go. We can buy the vehicle in confidence that that's the problem. But, and here's the but, let's play worst case scenarios. Let's play there's more than one leak. And when you fix that one, the other one will become more obvious. And that one could be inside of the engine. And this is always going to be the risk when you're buying a used vehicle. You don't actually know the history of it. You don't know how quickly that coolant's been leaking out. You don't know if that's a new leak or an old leak. And what we would do in a workshop is we would fix that leak, and then we would send it out and tell people to keep an eye on the coolant. And if the coolant drops over the next week or two, then come straight back and we will continue to test it. Now, we can pressure test it, but that doesn't mean to say that we're always going to fix it. So sometimes it does take more than one bite of the cherry. Unfortunately, it's frustrating, but it is part of the trade. Anyway, that's what you're looking for on a used vehicle. Also what you're looking on your vehicle. If you're buying a vehicle and you need a hand, give us a call if you're in South Australia.